This year's garden changes for 22 are a little bit of a work in progress yet, but I think I'm going to cover what I have for goals so far. In the in-ground garden that was put in last year, which was treated more like a traditional garden with rows for the most part, has been converted over to having in-ground beds. The cost of wood in that made me rethink actually making raised beds. So I just kind of upgraded the dirt, amended the dirt in place, and added some wood chip borders to control weeds. Once things are growing better, I plan on putting more pine needles over to cover the dirt to keep it moist, because it does dry out fast here. For the most part, the other areas are as they were. The only raised bed from 2020 that was back here, made out of leftover pieces there, this year is being used as a garlic bed. The 3 raised bed additions from last year are as they were, growing different things in them possibly than last year. Added the shepherd's hook with some flowers over there to create a little more color back here and draw more insects. The asparagus bed is doing fine, I guess. This is year 2. Not entirely sure what they should look like other than that are growing, and we can't eat them until Anakin finishes elementary school in 2 more years. But they look healthy. We'll hope that's good. I thought I ordered a lot of onion bunches this year, or a couple bunches that I thought were a lot of onions, but they only took up that much room in the garden. So the rest of that in-ground space got converted over to extra pepper plants that I grew. This year those are pretty much all orange bell peppers that I saved from seed from 2020. So I guess we'll see what they turn out, if they're still orange or if they were a hybrid and now I've got green bell peppers, which would be fine because I tried growing California Wonders from seed and none of them grew, period. And I just said period. I don't know what happened there. They were burpee seeds, which I thought was a good company, but I planted them the same as all these other peppers at the same time in the same seed tray, and these others all grew, so I don't know what happened. In this bed, I've got the Lesia peppers. I think they're all Lesia, if I remember correctly. And those I bought from Baker Creek seeds last year, and then I saved the seeds and planted them, not completely knowing if they would grow real well because I'm not experienced with saving seeds, and they seem to have seeded fine. Some are growing better than others. I just gave a little more nitrogen to the ones that are the smallest to try and jumpstart them. Some of them started turning rather yellow, but so did the bells. And I don't know if I had improperly fertilized them, overwatered them, which maybe washed away nutrients. It started when they were still in their seed pots. So they're actually starting to look a little bit better now that they are in garden. And last year I planted some sweet potatoes that grew fine. We didn't plant many. I planted them kind of late. And we got some sweet potatoes. They came from a start though. This year I bought a bunch more seed sweet potatoes and planted them in here, and I don't know if they're even growing yet. I don't know if they take longer than regular potatoes to start. Some of those, a lot of there's weeds in there, but I don't know what the plant should look like, so I'm waiting a bit longer before weeding much to make sure I don't pull out the wrong thing. The next garden over are red potatoes, which all came from seed potatoes, and they're all, I think every one of them sprouted. They're all growing. It's looking good, so hopefully have a nice crop of red potatoes that I will try and store some of this year after properly drying them out. Last year I didn't really do that. I'll come back around to the rest of the garden as I come around the other side, but part of the expansion for this year are fruit trees. This yard has had one crabapple tree, which makes a really sweet crabapple. This year it didn't have many blossoms, so it's I guess a dormant year for it. And there's a very old, probably Macintosh apple tree that's been here since probably 1961. That's slowly dying, but it is still making apples. Well, this year I decided to expand our orchard to try and have some more perennial type fruit that will just grow every year. I tried planting them all off to the side of the property because I don't plan on trying to pick up all of the fruit that drops. We have a lot of deer in the area, and I think that they'll do a pretty good job of cleaning up the dropped fruit for the year. But what doesn't, I'll just kind of rake off to the side. If I planted them in the middle of the yard more, then I would feel like I had to try and pick them up, and I didn't want to be doing that. So this year we have a plum that's been added. This is the one that's most in the yard. This plum came from Tractor Supply, and it is called a Methley plum. I guess I didn't even look at what it was. But they look like a plum tree that I had in a different yard. They were slightly smaller plums, but they were really sweet. So I'm hoping that that's what that will be. And then I picked up some apple trees from Home Depot. This first one is a Wolf River that it is completely for this zone. So I don't expect this tree to have any issues. It can go colder, I think, than we usually do here. The next tree should do fine as well. Occasionally I might have to try and do something to protect it while it's young, but it is made for this zone as well. A apple Honeycrisp. Its coldest temperature is just a little, like 5 degrees colder or warmer than what we sometimes can hit in zone 4B. So, but those, I cleared out brush in this part of the yard, and those trees have been planted right here off to the side. Also next to the bee habitat that I planted with Carlin's idea in mind. Last year we had some bees use it, so hopefully they do again this year. They're kind of ending now, but this was a great year for lilacs. The first 2 years we were here, they kind of froze off, didn't do well. Last fall they actually started budding, which was odd, so I didn't know what would happen this year, but they've been on for 10 days already, I'd say, and they still smell great in the yard. I wish they would last longer. They're starting to end now, so if we zoom in tight on some of those, we'll see that they're starting to look a little brown. So a lot of the brush I cleared out was mostly this kind of scrub brush that grows like a weed almost. Some of it was additional lilacs, but I needed the room for fruit trees. This area had a lot. I've taken pictures too, but that won't mean much to anybody but me. You can see here, there was a few more lilacs. There's really a tall one. I left the one in the back because I think it's going to be far enough away from the apple tree to not cause a problem. If it does, I'll take it out eventually. But the first tree planted back here is not apple, but a pear. Now both of these pears are probably more zone 5 than 4B, so I'm hoping for the best. We'll try and do some things to keep them warm if possible. I'll have to research that, but hopefully they get a good root system going and will survive the very occasional times we pass their lowest temperature in a year. We'll see. If not, next time I will order nothing but 4B stuff, which is a bit more limiting. Then we have a second pear, as both of these pear trees needed another one to properly pollinate. This Kiefer pear, both these pears came from Home Depot, as the tag says. So far they're growing well. They have room to grow back here. The last one that I added, this tree came from Stark Brothers. It's a Golden Delicious, which I really wanted to have, which is why I picked it up. So it came the smallest, a bare well, no, it wasn't bare root. It was the type of their tree that has a small root bulb, I guess. But it's, you know, I'm sure it will grow just fine, and starting from a small root base, it might take off better. We'll see. And then the tree that came from Home Depot, I was questioning myself before I bought it, thinking maybe this isn't a good idea. Hopefully it at least is pretty and makes nice blossoms, but it's a peach tree. Its coldest temperature, you know, is 10 degrees colder than what we can hit here. We could go many years without hitting its coldest temperature. So I don't think it will just immediately die off. I don't know that we have a long enough season to actually get peaches off from the tree. If it ends up just being a real pain dropping peaches that aren't ripe, we may end up taking it out. But I'm hoping that at the very least it's a pretty tree with nice blossoms, and it's, you know, it's off in the back here. And I still have room for lots of other fruit trees that I can replace it with. This part of the yard back here is largely left as it was. My thought process would be that if I ever got chickens, this part of the yard back here is where I would raise the chickens. I think there's enough room even to do meat chickens if we wanted. We could possibly even have a couple pigs, although that would probably be a desperation thing. I don't know if I like pork well enough to actually raise pigs. I do have a request for a goat, but I don't think that I would milk a goat. So I don't know that I would get anything out of the goat other than it would cut my grass for me back here, which maybe that would be good too. Better for the environment, no? Okay. So now back to one of the expansions for this year was I wanted to have a separate garden since I had the room, and this immediate area right here may become future garden, well, to about here. The most back area is going to be for animals if needed, but I can still expand the garden more if I decide I want to. For right now, I think it's big enough, unless we need to really start raising our own food for whatever reason. But this garden, which is looking a little bit rough, because I only tilled the spots where I was going to plant, which I made 4 rows. Tried covering up the grassy parts with a lot of straw, but the grass is still coming through the straw. I might pick up some weed barrier to try and cut that back to help hold the grass back. In the fall, I may just till the whole thing to help kill the grass, or maybe I'll cover it if I have weed barrier and let the grass die that way. But the idea for this garden is for vining things. So this year in this row here, I've planted 2 types of kind of like cantaloupe. They weren't called cantaloupe, but they look like it. I don't have the names offhand. I would have to look them up. But they both were from Baker Creek, and they both looked really good. If I zoom in there, I don't know if you'll see them, but there are some starting to sprout, finally. But we're kind of excited for that. We like cantaloupe here. The next 3 rows are all for squash, so they have lots of room to vine out too. They are the very first row, and the furthest away is a traditional butternut squash, Waltham, or however you pronounce that. The next 2 look like butternut squash, the shape, but they have a different name. They came from Baker Creek. One of them has kind of a more greenish look with stripes, and the other one almost has yellowish striping to it. Again, I'll have to add the names for my own reference in future years. There's a couple of them just starting to sprout, so not much happening with those yet. But the idea is this bigger space of garden has a lot more room for them to vine out and not start crawling into other things that I'm trying to grow. So we'll see how this goes. I don't know that it's going to happen this year, but I would like to. The reason the rows are kind of spaced the way they are is I would like to have arched trellises, between these 2, with this being a walkway, and then arched trellises here. Using cattle panels and T-posts, as lots of videos show online, particularly Roots and Refuge. one of my favorites. I definitely want to do that so that they can climb up, have better airflow, might help with disease. Last year I had a lot of powdery mildew problems, but that was exacerbated at least by how I planted things much too close together that were very dense in the other garden last year. So hopefully that won't be as big of an issue this year regardless, but eventually this will be trellised more. I did plant some different kinds of flowers on the ends of each of these rows. There's some sunflowers planted along the edges that aren't growing yet, just to try and make it look nice and bring in some pollinators. But that is the biggest expansion for 2022. The only other thing that's really new is an in-ground garden bed in the front. I made use of our utility trailer as a mobile frost avoidance system this year. We had one possibility of frost that came, so I loaded all the plants on the trailer and then I can drive it into the garage where they're protected. I don't think we did hit the frost. Actually, I think we did frost, but there's a chance for freeze. We didn't freeze because nothing else. I tried covering up the rest of the garden that had been planted. A couple of the blankets kind of fell off, but nothing was damaged. So the frost didn't actually, the little bit of frost that there was didn't actually hurt anything. Everything is still growing. Last year we lost cantaloupe and cucumbers to a frost and had to start over. You know, they still produced as they regrew. But okay, the new in-ground bed for this year is, you know, kind of a small traditional raised bed. Because wood was expensive, I saw somebody had the idea of using landscape timber, which is none of my other raised beds are treated wood. They're all, I think that was ash wood, which is rot resistant, and the elevated beds in the front are made out of redwood, which is, you know, not treated but rot resistant. So these are treated landscape timbers. From what I've read, it shouldn't really be a concern. That the chemicals used have been different for almost 30 years now as far as what are known to cause trouble. What does leach out of this is very minimal. It doesn't go far from the actual wood from what I'm hearing. And what the plants would actually take up, it would be even less than that if they did come in contact with. So I'm not very concerned. It wasn't ideal. I would have rather used non-treated, but I think it will be just fine. I can take steps of putting some sort of plastic liner or something in there to make a barricade inside if I decide I want to. But as of right now, I'm kind of talked myself into that it's not going to be terrible. And what it's used for this year are all of my large tomatoes. This is a combination of Wisconsin 55 tomatoes and a terracotta that I thought about ordering from Baker Creek, and Baker Creek decided to send the terracotta seeds as a free seed when I ordered a bunch of other seeds. So that worked out nicely. They all grew very well. I think it's terracotta are the back and Wisconsin 55s are the ones in the front here. Wisconsin 55s grew well last year. They were very resistant to any disease. They didn't crack much. They tasted fine, canned. So I was very happy with that. Apparently my grandparents used to use them because it was their favorite. My mom let me know that, and she bought me the Wisconsin 55s last year. So this year I grew some from seed. I think I found those in seed at M.I. Gardner, which when I get to the front, if I forget to say it, I am growing, I forget their name, they're Wisconsin cucumber that I also got from M.I. Gardner. And they're starting to sprout up. No frost problems this year. Another expansion that I did make are blueberries. This one here, I think I got these two blueberries came from Tractor Supply. They're for our environment, cold weather. This one doesn't seem to be doing much yet, but they were bare root. Actually, they weren't bare root. They were little root bundles. It's not showing any signs of life. This one's getting little leaves, so that's a good sign. These are more of a traditional small blueberry as far as the blueberry goes. And since I kind of was liking the idea of blueberries, I ordered from Stark Brothers a different kind of blueberry that is for our zone. I got 3 of them, and these they showed, I forget the name offhand, but they showed a very big blueberry. So I'm kind of excited, hoping that they grow well. I'm not expecting any this year, but their leaves are very red, so I was looking into that, and it sounds like just the transplanting process couldn't do that. So I'm not too concerned yet, but otherwise, if it continues, it might be a nitrogen issue, I guess. The little tags are in there somewhere, but I don't see them for the name. But they're looking good so far. Next year, maybe we'll get some blueberries. That is just about it for the backyard. The raised beds. Well, this is, I mean, we had pots here last year. I had pots here last year. This year, Macy wanted to grow, my daughter wanted to grow some loofah. We might have to try and stretch the season for our area, but we're giving it a shot. We made a little in-ground bed here where it can grow, and we can trellis it to this lattice that I just put in here, attached to our garlic bed. And I'm going to put a couple pots on either end of flowers. But that's new for this year. I guess something I can... This garden was all here last year. I replaced the fencing with metal fencing this year around the edges. And I'm using it as trellising. Here I also have some sunflowers planted along the posts. In the area that right along the fence, this is going to be dill. I haven't grown dill before, so I don't know if it's actually going to be enough dill. I may have to plant more, I'm not sure, I guess, we'll see. This area that's kind of wild right here is going to be where I put those potted cherry tomatoes that we saw on the trailer. They're going to go, the golden nuggets are going to go in this area where I can trellis them or tie them to the fence. Then along the fence on the back side, I have Kentucky pole beans. I haven't grown pole beans yet because I didn't really have a good spot, but now with this metal fencing I can use it as my trellis. So we really liked beans last year. I'm going to try freezing and canning some this year, so I planted a lot more beans. Those are all pole beans. And then also along the fence this year are sugar snap peas. From there down through there. And they can trellis along the fence, have good airflow, and hopefully I can avoid some of the massive mildew, powdery mildew that I had when last year I had a mass of them all growing right in this area. And then I had vining cantaloupe coming off the back of that got caught up in the powdery mildew. I also had squash down in this area that started getting it. So all of those vining things, other than the sweet potatoes here if they grow, are now out there though, where they have better airflow, and we can hopefully avoid that. Okay, I think that's it for back here. And this little in-ground bed is where I grew my Sweet 100s, a hybrid cherry. I've grown cherry tomatoes on the deck in pots for the last probably, wow, quite a few years. Each place I've been, I had some place where I could grow them, and I'd always have at least 5, 6 Sweet 100s and maybe just a couple large tomatoes for slicing up, growing on the deck. I just love their taste, and I think that they'll do fine here. They're growing fine so far. Oh, speaking of cherry tomatoes, on this side of the fence, along the fence back there, they're also in the trailer right now, will be yellow pears. Yellow pear cherry tomatoes will all grow along that fence. Also in the backyard, last year I had planted 2 raspberry bushes that They didn't die, but they didn't really grow much. They're not in a great spot. Maybe I'll move them eventually. I didn't really expect them to even come back this year, but this one is growing very well so far. And then just on the other side of this door to the back of the shed is the one that I thought was really dead, but it is also growing this year. So I've been fertilizing them and watering them, and they are continuing to grow. And the front garden area, which this was part of when we first moved to this house in 2020, and my daughter Macy was finishing high school, and she had some plants that she was growing in a botany class, and she asked if we could make a garden here and plant them. And that's what started the thought process of, I don't know how I actually came across the elevated beds on a YouTube video, but being lazy, I thought that looks like a great way to keep them weeded. So that's what I did. In that very first year we were here, I built these 3 raised or elevated garden beds. Very simple to build. Wood wasn't super expensive yet back then. That's redwood or cedar. I don't know, maybe it's cedar. One of those two. They're holding up fine. They've grown, they're starting their 3rd year now of growing food for us. But I wanted to show this, which has been here for quite a while. This was a bed that my dad made using an old sewing machine. The wood has been replaced a couple times. What's there is still what he had replaced once. And my mom still stops out and plants petunias? I'm not sure what they are. But she plants this every year, kind of planting them closer together than they should be. And it creates a really full, colorful flower overflow. And it looks great right here. So I just wanted to show that too, even though it's not really part of the garden. But walking into the elevated garden, this first one this year has always had beans in it, but also had other things. This year it is all green beans. Well, half of it are a reddish bean, the other half are a yellow wax bean. It seems like a lot, but I followed the directions on spacing. But they're all bush beans. So we really like cooking them up with some garlic and butter, and I'm going to try freezing them and canning them this year. So we planted lots of beans. This is our hot pepper garden. This has got half datils, don't know if I pronounced that right. That's another seed from Baker Creek that I thought about ordering and didn't. They're a hot pepper, but they're supposed to have a bit of a citrus taste to start off with, or pineapple citrus. They sounded interesting. They sent free seed of that when I made a different order, so that worked out really well as well. They read my mind. They're growing well. We'll see what they taste like. And then the taller ones on the left side there are regular jalapenos. They all grew, they must be one of the easiest peppers to grow. Every seed I planted grew, and they're growing fast and tall. I planted a whole bunch of jalapenos, and I believe this is the only one that's really still growing decently. That one looks like it might, I don't know if it'll survive. I might be too stunted to even make anything. We'll see. And that's also a jalapeno over there, which is looking better. So it might still make it through. I see 2 dogs that want to make a little appearance here. Loki doesn't like having his picture taken, doesn't like having a camera pointed at him. Roxy there doesn't care. Then in the back side of this 3rd raised bed are the Wisconsin cucumbers. Last year this worked great. They climb up this trellis, and I had lots of cucumbers and pickled for the first time. So fingers crossed, they are starting to sprout. There. Those coffee cans will have marigolds growing in them eventually here. This area gets 7 to 8 hours of sun, most all of it in the middle of the day. In the morning here it's mostly shaded, and in the afternoon it gets shaded by the house. So things here grow a little slower than the backyard, which is fine. I can kind of plant the beans in the backyard. I'll be harvesting before these beans, so it's kind of like succession planting without having to plant them at different times. They just grow at different speeds because of the amount of sun they're getting here. And then this area also ends up looking pretty nice because there's lily of the valley that grow in the back.